I've been to school for a few years. I've worked in different workplaces, and everywhere I look, productivity is presented as a virtue. Is that the case in the Bible? Not at all. Productivity and performance 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I remember in the 80s, the 90s, different stores were starting to open on Sundays, and that was the big thing. And so now we're in a society where, it just never sleeps, never stops. And is that good? This sense of productivity all the time, is that good? In Deuteronomy and in Exodus, we have this commandment. The 10 Commandments, number 4 is keep the Sabbath. So you probably know there are 2 versions of the 10 Commandments. One is in Deuteronomy, the other one is in Exodus. And when you look at the whole list of the 10 Commandments written in the Bible, the one that relates to keeping the Sabbath is the longest. It's the one that takes the most text, the most verses. And it's quite interesting, because if you say, do not murder, or do not commit adultery, or do not steal, it's kind of self-explanatory. But when you say, you got to stop 1 day a week, it's as if that one needs explanation. And even more interesting, the version in Deuteronomy and the one in Exodus don't give the same explanation. So I'll read the first from Deuteronomy. Observe the Sabbath day and keep it holy, as the Lord your God commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is the Sabbath for the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter or your male or female slave or your ox or your donkey or any of your livestock or the resident alien in your towns, so that your male and female slave may rest as well as you. And here's the explanation. Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. So, you must keep the Sabbath, stop 1 day a week. What's the reason? It's a social justice reason. It's that you and all of the animals and the people around get the chance to stop and rest. It's really against slavery, a 7 day a week type slavery. And we all deserve to stop and rest. So that's the explanation in Deuteronomy. But then we go to Exodus, and it says this. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you, your son and your daughter, your male and female slave, your livestock, and the alien resident in your towns. Here's the explanation. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but rested the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and consecrated it. Wow! So in Exodus, the explanation is you have to stop 1 day a week to preserve cosmic balance. It's a theological and an environmental reason. It's because creation, producing, it takes effort, and then you stop to just let it grow. And and it's time for the creator and the creature to meet. The first one has really a social justice component to it. This one has a cosmic component to it. And here's a very concrete example. Here I'm going to show you a graph. The bottom line there, that axis, is it's 1 year. It goes from July and down to the month of June. And then the vertical axis is the electricity consumption in megawatts. And now we're talking about tens of thousands of megawatts, gigawatts actually. So here's the graph. So in the province of Quebec, or in Canada, you can see the summer is it's flat and it's down. Okay, the energy consumption. And then all of a sudden, in the colder months, it goes up, 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 and then you get a peak. So that's normal. In Quebec, many people heat their houses with electricity. So that's why we see electricity consumption right here. But then something strange happens. Did you notice that? There's not just one peak, there are two distinct peaks there. One is the beginning of December, then goes down, and then goes back up mid-January. So what happens during that period? What happens socially, culturally, in Canada at the end of December? Christmas holidays. Christmas holidays, lots of industries stop. Lots of stores slow down. Lots of people just don't go to work, so it's not necessary to heat or to light these office buildings. And people gather up. Sometimes they're not even in their own house. They just go to another house, so there's less electricity usage there. Everyone's in the same spot. So wow, we're consuming less electricity during the holidays. We're giving nature a break. It's a common Sabbath. Here's another example. Here is a more precise graph. It comes from the UK. So we have what you see up and down is day, night, day, night, day, night, and then you can see 2 days usually that are down. Those would be weekends, where there's less energy consumption because people are less at work and then are just heating their homes. And then it goes back for 5 days, goes down for 2 days, Saturday, Sunday. But then you can see the graph, the time is December, January, February. So see that? End of December, beginning of January? Same thing. The general tendency, it goes down. So that's a great discovery. Holidays are great for the environment. It's a form of Sabbath. And we stop working, and then we put less pressure on the Earth's resources. If you want a great book to be enlightened about the concept of Sabbath, it's this book here by Matthew Sleeth, who is or was an MD and then became an evangelical pastor on environmental topics. He has a simple way of expressing himself, and he's really interesting. And in this book, 24/6 rather than 24/7 means you work for 6 days and then stop. And that's what he integrated in his life, this balance of stopping for 1 day a week and being with the Creator. And there was a really interesting anecdote or fact in his book, and it's about the Seventh-day Adventists. The highest concentration of Adventists in the U.S. is in a little town called Loma Linda in California. And there's something like 10,000 of them. And so they practice the Sabbath on the Saturday. Everyone stops. No stores are open. Most of them, but not all, are vegetarians. Most of them, but not all, take no alcohol. Usually there's no tobacco. And here's what's really amazing about them. Their life expectancy is 10 years more than the national average. Wow. So, yes, being vegetarians and almost no alcohol must contribute to that. But the fact that socially they all practice the Sabbath and stop and appreciate life and turn towards the Creator and towards one another, it gives more time to their life. Matthew Sleeth goes on to say that all of these days that they put aside for God, God gave back to them those days, so that they live 10 years longer. That is really beautiful. And as I've presented before, practicing the Sabbath or stopping from time to time gets us out of this logic of always consuming, of always taking, but stopping and kind of giving back. Well, here's a crunchy question. Does the earth need rest? The Bible actually answers that question. So in Leviticus, there's a call for Sabbath for the earth. And the picture here, you see an example of a field lying fallow. For 6 years you shall sow your field, but in the 7th year there shall be a Sabbath of complete rest for the land, a Sabbath for the Lord. You shall not sow your field. It shall be a year of complete rest for the land. You may eat what the land yields during its Sabbath. So my ancestors who lived in New France, starting off 400 years ago, the technique back then was to lie fallow every 3 years. So the field next to their homes would be split into 3 sections. First, they would, in any given section, they would grow wheat first, then harvest. The year after, it would be barley, then harvest, and then just leave it fallow for 1 year, and then go around that cycle again. So that's how my ancestors did it. But then at the same time, historically, the Iroquois nations did not fallow because their agriculture was based on the 3 sisters. They would have a field with corn growing vertically, and then beans growing following that stalk, and then squash on the surface. And these 3 would interact in such a way that they helped each other. So the squash, for example, has huge leaves, so that would cover the soil and keep it damp and keep that good bacteria in the soil, and just the soil was healthier thanks to that. And the beans actually grab the nitrogen and put it into soil nitrogen, which helps all of the other plants grow. And the corn is there as support in the middle. So they didn't need to fallow. They would have their field and grow the 3 sisters there constantly, year after year. But in their village, they would cut trees all around to obviously build the houses and other structures, but they also took the wood for fires or for other things. And so they were cutting farther and farther. And so to make sure that the land would replenish itself, they moved their villages roughly every generation, something around 10 to 20 years. And this would allow the territory to renew itself, the land to renew itself. And so they wouldn't leave the fields fallow, but they would move their whole village to leave that section and let it replenish itself. Another type of Sabbath. But that completely stopped with the Green Revolution. And since then, fertilizers are necessary to continue a monoculture in a single place. Now we have to say that these are dangerous chemical fertilizers. And the weird thing is that the soil is still depleted. There are lots of fields where there has been monoculture for many decades. And even though they add chemical fertilizers and they add pesticides and they added all of these things, they just don't have the production they used to have, and they just leave it there. And the soil is completely depleted. And it takes lots of effort to actually replenish the soil there. There are two approaches that will help us. The first one will be regenerative agriculture. There's this great movie that came out recently called Kiss the Ground. Regenerative agriculture. It shows basically that when you don't till the soil, it keeps the soil healthy. Now, that is so counterintuitive because we've been doing that for so long, tilling the soil. But no, we should make kind of a razor-sharp incision, just the depth we need, and put those seeds. Sometimes we can add upon that soil with compost, with other things, but not tilling the soil anymore. Letting that soil structure with all of the life that's already there and organized. We should leave that there. And this way, it captures CO2 and keeps more moisture in the soil, and it just produces more. So we're often accusing agriculture of being one of the culprits for climate change, but now we can do agriculture to actually capture, to store some of that CO2. And that's amazing news. Okay? And so now we're giving the soil a break, not by leaving it fallow, but by not tilling it and letting it be alive and do what it's supposed to do. There's another approach called permaculture. And this is just amazing. We can see it in one of the movies called The Biggest Little Farm. They start off with soil completely depleted, and one part they transform into fruit tree forest with a great diversity. And then another part, it's the vegetable garden and the and others that they produce. And there's this collaboration with farm animals that obviously their poop enriches the soil, and so just to bring these animals in some parts with the fruit trees or with other productions, and then some of the animals will eat some of the pests. One great example was the ducks that just loved to go eat the snails. And so to see how the animals and the agriculture, and we finally get into a great balance and great production, even better than the industrial monocultures we're used to. There's also a French-Canadian guy who founded this, the Market Gardener's Toolkit. It's also a great movie, and it proves that with different plant combinations, a bigger density of all the vegetables, a bigger diversity, on a tiny plot of land, you can produce more vegetables and more revenue than typical monocultures that use pesticides, that use organic fertilizers. Again, there's almost no tilling in his way of doing things. And we have lots to learn from. And there's also a dynamic with the animals, which is great. It's permaculture. God tells us through the Bible that all the efforts we put into the land for it to produce does not all go to its owner. Because although the farmer has been putting into it lots of effort, the land has been working, and God has been providing. So this harvest must be shared. In Leviticus, you shall not reap to the very edges of your field, or gather gleanings of your harvest. You shall not strip your vineyard bare, or gather the fallen grapes of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the alien. So that's great. And it's funny that we talk about the poor and the immigrants, but also by leaving some fallen grapes, not harvesting the field completely, it's also good for other animals. It's also good for the soil that, if left fallow, it can continue growing. And this tradition, we could say, of gleaning was very useful in the story of Ruth, because Ruth is a widow, she's an immigrant, and she tells her mother-in-law, let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain. And it's thanks to that gleaning that finally the story evolves and she meets the owner and can marry him. But let us have that preoccupation that it doesn't all belong to the person who has worked the land. The land has worked a lot and is sharing it with other people, other living things.